Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be here. This is my second time at Savannah, so I'm not a rookie, and believe me, I came back because I had such a good time last year, and it's a book festival where they treat the authors really well. So I want to thank, Marilyn and Scott Richards, who are my hosts, and I think, Robin Gold and Stephanie Dutton here, who are the management of this complex exercise, and then all the staff that has put together a really, really wonderful program for all of us to get together and learn a little bit about literature and writing and what we have to say. I'm going to tell you a personal story today, and it's something that I normally don't do, but this story that I'm going to tell you is in large part what motivated me to write the second book, What It Is Like to Go to War. And one of the things I talk about in that second book is that our culture has basically got some kind of an agreement, like I call it sort of the code of silence, about what really goes on in combat. What really goes on when our nation asks our kids to go out and kill some other kids. I'm no pacifist. But I think that we tend to sort of want to not think about it very much. And, my family is the same as all families. I was 50 years old when I found out that my father had fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Well, Dad, wasn't that a big deal? Man, he never asked me. I'd get all kinds of, stories about, when they got drunk on Calvados at Normandy and, that sort of stuff. And what it is that our culture is very good on, you don't whine, right? You don't whine. And you don't brag. You don't brag. Well, any combat veteran will tell you that 95% of the time it's things to whine and complain about, and about 4% of the time it's things you want to brag about. Well, that doesn't leave you very much to talk about in this culture. So one of the things that I was hoping to do with this book is start breaking that down a little bit. A little personal history, so I grew up in this very small town in Oregon. It was a logging town then, called Seaside, Oregon. And back when I grew up, I think virtually all the fathers had been in World War II. And we called it the service back then. That was when your uncle was in the service. And I think that, again, our culture is starting to make a change. I don't hear the service anymore. I hear it called the military. And I think that's an interesting switch in language that is happening, that we should think about. And I got a scholarship to Yale and blasted out of Clatsop County and joined the Marines because, that was sort of the thing to do. Guys on my high school football team would join the Marines. So I want to be like them. I want to go down there. And I joined something called the PLC program, which is it's sort of like a Marine ROTC, but they don't pay you. They just, you get run through boot camp in the summer, and then the people that survive that go to college as reservists. You don't get paid, but you get to be a Marine. I thought that sounds like a real good deal, but we didn't have to wear uniforms or march around during college. And then I got a Rhodes Scholarship, and I thought I wouldn't be able to go. But I wrote a letter to the Marine Corps, and they said, that's fine, take it. And I was there about 6 weeks, and I started to feel really guilty because the guys I'd served with and trained with and kids from my own high school had been over there. I've been told we lost 5 boys from my high school in Vietnam. And there I am drinking beer and having a wonderful time with the English girls, and started to feel like I was just hiding. So I went to the war, and I ended up in the 3rd Marine Division, 4th Marines, and we were stationed in the jungle in the mountains, way up where the DMZ meets the Laotian border, and I was an infantry platoon commander, eventually the executive officers of the company, and finally, after I got shot a couple of times, the Marine Corps figures, well, he's either too stupid or too brash or too unlucky, so we got to pull him out of here, and so they put me in the back seat of one of these little spotter planes, and that's where the air medals came from, because people say, how could you get air medals? You were in the infantry. I wrote this book, What It Is Like to Go to War, for several reasons. The audience was young people who are considering making the military a career. I wanted to reach them, because I don't want any romantics joining, the United States military, our armed forces. I want people to join it with clear heads and clear eyes about what they're really going to be getting into. And I also wrote it for veterans because I had to struggle with a lot of things. I thought, well, if I can struggle with these things and get a little bit of clarity, somebody reading it might be helped by it. And I also wanted to write it for the general public and particularly our policymakers, because as I'll get into the speech, I think that it's very important that we understand that we are involved very deeply in our wars, but we tend to think we're not. I opened the book with a quote from Bismarck, and one of my favorite quotes. And Bismarck said, any fool can learn from their own mistakes. I prefer to learn from other people's mistakes. And I thought, well, if I can put some of the mistakes down that I learned the hard way, maybe someone else would do it. And here's where I launched into this story. We were on an assault, and going up a very steep hill. And by this time, it had broken down into chaos. I mean, you have all these plans, but as everybody will tell you, as soon as the first shot's fired, the plan just goes poof. And the way it really gets done is individual 18 and 19-year-old Marines know what the objective is, and they figure out how to get there, and that's how it really works. 2 hand grenades came flying off the top of this hill, and they exploded, and I got knocked unconscious. And when I came to, it was, sort of a mess, but I was still functioning. And we threw 2 grenades back, and boom, boom. 2 more grenades came flying out from the top, from a hole up above us. And we were scrambling uphill because we wanted to get under them. So when they went down below us, we threw 2 back. And finally, Lieutenant Marlantes figures out we're only going to have about 2 grenades left. This is not being really smart. So I told the 2 guys that were with me, I said, next time you throw the grenades, I'm going to be around the side, and I'm going to go up the hill, and I'll be in a position to shoot these guys when they have to stand up to throw the grenades at us. And I worked my way around the side of the hill. And I could see that one of the NVA soldiers was already dead. And the other one was, just like us. He was a kid, late teens. And he rose to throw the grenade, and our eyes locked. This is a very unusual thing in combat. You generally don't ever really lock eyes with the people you're about to kill. And he was no further away from me than about the 3rd or 4th row here. And I was just waiting for him. And I remember whispering to myself, because I couldn't speak Vietnamese, and wishing I could speak Vietnamese, don't throw it. If you don't throw it, I won't pull the trigger. If you don't throw it, I won't pull the trigger. Well, he just snarled at me, and he threw it. And I pulled the trigger. And at that moment, I didn't feel a thing. In fact, I remember being slightly chagrined because I had anticipated the recoil on the rifle and had bucked it just a little bit because, drill sergeants kick you in the rear end for doing what they call bucking your shot. And it hit the dirt slightly in front of the guy and then went into him after it hit the dirt. So it was like, and then, of course, the battle's still going on. Years later, probably about 10 years later, I was in one of these California sort of groups that they had. I mean, you remember Esalen and, all this sort of California stuff about getting in touch with your feelings. And no one had heard of PTSD. I mean, we were totally unaware of it. I was the typical sort of guy that was there trying to get in touch with my feelings. My wife had brought me there. And, finally the leader turns on me and she says, he says, I understand that you were in the Vietnam War, and and she said, well, how do you feel about that? And I said, the typical answer. And so she said, well, why don't we start talking about it? And she asked me to apologize to this kid that I shot. And I'm game. I said, okay, I'll do that. And I started to think about that kid. And that kid did have a mother and a sister or whatever. And I started to cry, and I started to bawl. I mean, I started crying so hard that my ribs ached. I couldn't stop for about 3 days. It was literally 3 days I couldn't stop crying. I'd go to work, and I just would have to suck it up. I mean, people would start to talk to me, and I'd have to leave. I'd have to go outside. I'd have to walk around. So I managed to shove that down again. I'm going to deal with this. I got 5 kids to raise. At that time, I only had a couple. And fine, everything's cool again, about 1990, I'm driving down I-5 about 2 in the morning, and again, this is a wonderful veterans thing. You're all by yourself, you know.